Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a really huge and frankly devastating conflict, the Second Congo War. It kicked off back on August 2nd, 1998.
That's right. It's often called Africa's World War or the Great War of Africa, and for good reason. It was massive.
Absolutely. And we know you want to get a handle on complex topics quickly but thoroughly. So our aim today is to cut through that complexity, give you a clear understanding of this pivotal event, without getting totally bogged down.
Exactly. Think of this as your shortcut to the core essentials. We've done the research, and we'll draw out the key threads so you can grasp why this war was and still is so significant.
And the scale is just staggering. We're talking, what, 9 African nations involved?
At least 9, plus around 25 different armed groups. It's genuinely one of the largest wars in modern African history. The human cost alone is hard to comprehend.
Okay, so what was the initial spark? The sources point to a breakdown in alliances, right?
Pretty much. Congolese President Laurent Désiré Kabila, who, remember, had only just come to power himself in the First Congo War, he basically turned on his former allies.
Allies like Rwanda and Uganda, the ones who'd helped him overthrow Mobutu Sese Seko just the year before.
Exactly those ones. It just shows how incredibly volatile the situation was, how quickly things could shift.
Right. So our mission for this deep dive, let's unpack the background, how the war unfolded, who the key players were both inside the DRC and the external powers, and critically, the lasting consequences. We'll piece it together from the sources.
Sounds good. And to really get the Second Congo War, you do need a little context from the first one.
Right, Kabila's rise in May 97.
Yes, backed heavily by Rwanda, Uganda, and Angola. They were key in ousting Mobutu, the longtime dictator. You need to remember that initial coalition to understand the later, betrayal.
But that coalition, the ADFL, it sounds like it was shaky from day one.
Oh, definitely. Sources suggest there was friction almost immediately within Kabila's alliance of democratic forces for the liberation of Congo.
What kind of friction?
Well, fundamentally, there was tension between the Rwandan Ugandan group and the Congolese Angolan faction within the ADFL. Different ideas about power, influence. It created fault lines that were maybe destined to crack.
And Kabila's move to end the Rwandan military presence in July 98, that really poured fuel on the fire, didn't it?
It really did. When he essentially ordered the Rwandan contingent out of the Congolese army, that was the direct catalyst. It pushed the button on the new armed rebellion against him, a clear signal things had changed.
Okay, and another key group mentioned a lot are the Banyamulenge. Who exactly were they in this picture?
The Banyamulenge are Congolese Tutsi. Their situation was incredibly complex, sort of caught in the middle. They were important players in the rebellion against Kabila.
Why? What drove them?
Long-standing issues around their Congolese nationality, which was often contested, plus strained relations with other ethnic groups, and even, ironically, with their former Rwandan allies. They were really stuck between a rock and a hard place.
So wasn't there a point where Kabila actually favored them initially?
Yes, that's a crucial point. Right after Kabila won, some Banyamulenge did get leadership roles.
But that caused its own problems.
It absolutely did. It fueled resentment among other groups in the Kivu region who already saw them as too closely tied to Rwanda because of their role in the ADFL.
And then Kabila tried to integrate Banyamulenge soldiers into the main Congolese army, the FAC. That didn't go well, I gather.
No, not at all. When the regime tried to disperse them throughout the Forces Armées Congolaises, or FAC, they mostly refused. Many mutinied.
Why refuse?
Well, they were resistant to serving alongside former soldiers from Mobutu's army, the FAZ, the very people they'd fought against in 96. So when the Rwandans left in 98, they felt exposed, vulnerable again.
And the FAC itself.
Yeah.
The Congolese army. Sources suggest it wasn't exactly a crack fighting force.
That's putting it mildly. Many were ex-FAZ, so conventionally trained, yes, but they were largely unpaid, undisciplined, a real problem.
So potential, but not realized.
Exactly. Analysts thought if they were well-led, equipped, and crucially paid, they could be formidable. But by July 98, just like under Mobutu, they hadn't seen salaries for months.
And that lack of pay, poor morale, that made them susceptible to joining the rebellion.
A huge factor. It explains why so many rallied so quickly to the rebellion, led by figures like Major Ondakane.
It really sounds like a powder keg waiting to explode. Plus, the broader context, Mobutu's legacy of organized chaos, as one source calls it.
Absolutely. Decades of misrule and corruption under Mobutu had weakened the state completely. It created a power vacuum and made the DRC's incredible natural resources a tempting target for everyone, internally and external.
Key sources driving conflict.
Yeah.
A familiar story.
Sadly, yes. Our research shows countries using all sorts of tactics, direct intervention, bribing local leaders, all trying to get a piece of the pie.
Okay, so we have the volatile background. Fragile alliances, ethnic tensions, Kabila alienating his backers, Banyamulenge grievances, a weak army. Now, the spark itself, August 2nd, 1998.
It kicks off with Banyamulenge soldiers mutinying in Goma, a key city in the east. And Rwanda jumps in almost immediately with significant help.
And this quickly forms into the main rebel group.
Yes, the Rally for Congolese Democracy, the RCD, mostly Banyamulenge initially, but heavily armed and backed by both Rwanda and Uganda.
And they made rapid gains, didn't they? It sounds almost like a blitzkrieg.
Incredibly rapid. They quickly took control of the resource-rich eastern provinces, based themselves in Goma, took key towns like Bukavu, Uvira, and then, remarkably quickly, they were threatening Kinshasa itself.
Kinshasa, that's way over on the other side of the country.
Exactly. It was a lightning advance that shocked a lot of people, including Kabila.
Must have sent panic through his government. What did he do?
He desperately pleaded for help from other African nations, and actually he got it. Several SADC countries, the Southern African Development Community, responded.
Who stepped up?
Zimbabwe, Namibia, and Angola were key early responders. Later, Chad and Sudan offered some support too.
So an internal rebellion instantly becomes a regional war.
Instantly. Zimbabwean forces were crucial. They managed to halt the rebels near Kinshasa, and Angolan troops launched counterattacks that pushed the rebels back elsewhere.
So this intervention saved Kabila.
It definitely saved his government from collapsing right then, but it massively escalated the conflict. It dragged in more countries, more agendas, more complexity. It became Africa's world war.
And Uganda. While they were backing the RCD in the east with Rwanda, they also supported another group.
Yes. Uganda also created and exclusively backed the Movement for the Liberation of Congo, the MLC, mainly operating up in the north.
So even the allies backing the rebels had potentially diverging interests.
It certainly highlights that. Each external actor seemed to be trying to carve out its own sphere of influence. It wasn't just about removing Kabila.
And Rwanda couldn't really hide its direct involvement for long, could it?
No. Initially, they were a bit ambiguous publicly. But by November 98, President Kagame himself admitted Rwandan troops were actively helping the RCD.
Why admit it then?
Well, the evidence was mounting, and there was international pressure. Apparently, Nelson Mandela had personally asked him to push for peace talks just before that admission.
But even with diplomacy starting, like that ceasefire in Windhoek in January 99, the fighting didn't stop.
That's a really crucial point. Some nations signed it, yes. But the RCD itself, they weren't signatories.
So the agreement was basically toothless on the ground.
Pretty much. The fighting just carried on. The ceasefire didn't hold.
So the initial rebel surge was stopped by intervention, but it just led to a bloody stalemate, didn't it? The war just ground on.
Exactly. Diplomacy continued. The UN even authorized a mission, MONUC, in February 2000 to monitor the ceasefire.
MONUC, the UN mission.
Right. But the fighting persisted across huge swaths of the country. The suffering was immense.
And things got even messier, didn't they, with Uganda and Rwanda, who were supposedly allies in backing the RCD, actually fighting each other.
Yes, the clashes between Ugandan and Rwandan forces in Kisangani in May and June 2000 were brutal. Kisangani, a major city, nowhere near their own borders.
What did that signify?
It starkly showed how tangled the web of alliances and rivalries was. It proved that the strategic interests of Uganda and Rwanda often trumped their supposed support for their Congolese allies. It was about their own power plays.
Then a major shock. January 2001, Laurent Kabila is assassinated.
A massive turning point. He was shot on January 16th. The exact circumstances, well, they're still debated.
What are the theories?
Some reports say it was one of his own bodyguards. Others pointed fingers at child soldiers within his security detail. It remains murky.
And his son, Joseph Kabila, takes over. Very young, wasn't he?
Yes, unexpectedly thrust into power, and his leadership did bring a bit of a shift.
How so?
In the western parts of the country, things gradually became a bit more stable under Joseph. Some international aid started trickling back in, but the East remained incredibly violent and chaotic.
And around this time, the UN starts looking seriously into this resource exploitation angle, right? The blood minerals.
Yes, a hugely important UN report came out in April 2001. It directly accused Rwanda, Uganda, and Zimbabwe of systematically looting the DRC's diamonds, cobalt, coltan, gold. You name it.
Coltan especially for electronic.
Exactly. The report was damning and even recommended sanctions against those countries.
Meanwhile, on the ground, things were getting tough for Rwanda too. Their Congolese allies were getting fed up.
That's a key dynamic shift around 2002. Many RCD members started defecting, some even joining Joseph Kabila's government forces.
And the Banyamulenge specifically.
The Banyamulenge, who'd been the core of Rwanda's proxy force, grew really tired of Kigali's control in the endless war. This led to mutinies, even violent clashes between the Banyamulenge and the Rwandan army, their former allies.
Wow, so the alliances were really fraying.
Completely. But amidst all this, diplomatic efforts finally started to bear fruit in 2002.
What kind of agreements?
A whole series, actually. There were the inter-Congolese political negotiations, a big global and inclusive agreement on transition, a direct deal between the DRC and Rwanda called the Pretoria Agreement.
And one with Uganda too.
Yes, a separate agreement between DRC and Uganda specifically focused on withdrawing troops. It was a complex diplomatic push on multiple fronts.
And did the foreign troops actually leave then?
Largely, yes. Rwanda officially completed its withdrawal in October 2002. Uganda pulled its forces out around the same time. It was a major step, a sign the main phase of the war might be ending.
Though, as we know, the problems didn't just vanish.
Not at all. The legacy of that intervention casts a very long shadow.
Let's dig into those foreign backers of the Kabila government a bit more. Zimbabwe under Mugabe seemed particularly committed.
Zimbabwe was arguably Kabila's strongest external supporter for much of the war. They had a decent air force, which was a big help early on. Their military was seen as relatively proficient, tactically quite smart in how they stopped that initial rebel push on Kinshasa.
But it cost Zimbabwe dearly, didn't it, economically?
Hugely. The sheer expense of the Congo intervention put an immense strain on Zimbabwe's economy. Many analysts point to it as a major factor in the economic meltdown and hyperinflation that followed there.
What about Namibia? They supported Kabila too.
They did, yes. They sent troops as part of the SADC intervention force, but their direct military role seems to have been a bit more limited compared to Zimbabwe or Angola. They did eventually withdraw as part of the peace deals.
And Angola? Their role sounds like it was absolutely critical, especially at the start.
Indispensable, really, in saving Laurent Kabila in '98. Angola apparently funded its intervention using future oil money borrowing against expected revenues.
That's a risky strategy.
Fiery, and they face their own issues with falling oil prices. Plus, some suggested that peace in Congo might lead to awkward questions about how Angola itself was managing its oil wealth, which wasn't very transparent.
In Chad and Sudan, what was their angle?
Their support for Kabila was maybe less central. Sudan's involvement seemed more about hitting back at Uganda because Uganda supported rebels inside Sudan. Sudan supported anti-Uganda rebels operating from Congo. It was complex proxy warfare.
And Uganda itself, while backing rebels, claimed it was there for security reasons.
They cited bilateral security agreements, yes. But there's overwhelming evidence they were also deeply involved in the illegal mineral trade in the areas they controlled. Security and profit seem to go hand in hand.
So looking at all these external players,
Yeah.
it's a real mix of motives, isn't it? Security, regional power, pure economics.
Absolutely. Perceived threats, desire for influence, and the undeniable lure of Congo's vast mineral wealth, they all swirled together, driving decisions and actions throughout the war.
Okay, let's shift to the aftermath. The peace deals were signed, foreign troops largely left, but the violence didn't just stop, especially in the east.
Sadly, no. The peace agreements didn't bring peace everywhere. Rwanda and Uganda, despite their official withdrawal, were widely accused of continuing to back proxy rebel groups in strategic eastern areas.
Well, it was a goal.
Continued influence, continued access to resources, destabilizing the region perhaps. It kept the conflict simmering, fueled instability, and just crushed any real hope of lasting peace and development there.
And the economic impact on the DRC itself, just devastating.
Utterly catastrophic. Infrastructure destroyed, trade collapsed, massive food shortages in cities like Kinshasa, rampant inflation. By 2003, estimates suggested over 70% of Congolese lived in absolute poverty. Malnutrition soared, the health system basically collapsed.
We often focus on the human and political cost, but the environmental toll was huge too, wasn't it?
Immense and often overlooked, Congo's rainforest, a global treasure, suffered incredible damage. We're talking forest loss comparable to the size of Belgium.
Wow. And wildlife.
Decimated. The elephant population was halved. Hippos, great apes. Numbers plummeted due to habitat loss, displacement, the bushmeat trade, and just a total breakdown of conservation. Displaced people clearing land for farming, firewood. It
Yeah.
was a perfect storm. Virunga National Park ended up on the Endangered World Heritage List.
And the human death toll.
Right.
The numbers are staggering, but also disputed.
Yes, and that dispute highlights how hard it is to get accurate data in such chaos. Some estimates go as high as nearly 4 million dead from violence, disease, starvation combined. Others are lower, but still horrific. Whatever the exact number, the scale of loss is just unimaginable.
And the grim irony. Congo's incredible mineral wealth, instead of bringing prosperity, fueled the fire.
It's the absolute tragic paradox. Coltan, cobalt, gold, diamonds. These incredibly valuable resources became central to igniting and prolonging the war. Neighboring countries, international actors, they benefited from the often illegal trade, while the Congolese people suffered.
The link to our technology, smartphones, batteries.
It's a direct and deeply uncomfortable link. The demand for those minerals connects consumers globally to the suffering and exploitation in Congolese mines, where conditions are often brutal, even involving child labor.
A country so rich underground, yet consistently ranking near the bottom of the UN's Human Development Index.
It's the stark reality of conflict, corruption, and exploitation. That low HDI rank is a tragic testament to the enduring human cost of this crisis.
And the humanitarian crisis isn't over, is it? Millions still need help.
Far from it. Years after the war officially ended, the crisis grinds on. Over 8 million people are still internally displaced. Over 25 million need humanitarian aid. Food security is the biggest, most desperate need.
There were also some specific incidents highlighted in the sources. Operation Kitona, early in the war.
A very audacious move by Rwanda. Hijacking civilian planes to fly troops deep into DRC territory, seizing a key government airbase. It showed their boldness and strategic thinking right at the start.
And the horrifying reports of a pygmy genocide.
Yes, deeply disturbing and credible allegations between 2002 and 2003, particularly in the Ituri region. Certain rebel groups were accused of targeting pygmy populations. It highlights the horrific ethnic dimensions and the vulnerability of marginalized groups.
Then there's the International Court of Justice ruling in 2005. What did that establish?
The ICJ found Uganda had violated DRC sovereignty and was responsible for billions in damages due to its intervention and resource exploitation.
Did it lead to accountability?
Well, here's the kicker. Both Uganda and Rwanda continued to receive significant international debt relief afterwards, despite the evidence they'd profited from illegal mineral trade. It raises serious questions about international justice and consistency.
And the violence continues even more recently with groups like M23.
Sadly, yes. The conflict involving M23, the movement of 23 March, and the repeated accusations of renewed backing from Rwanda and Uganda, it just shows how cyclical the instability is. The root causes haven't gone away. The UN has documented serious human rights abuses by M23.
Which brings up tricky legal questions about state responsibility, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If Rwanda or Uganda are backing M23, are they legally responsible for M23's actions?
Exactly. It's a huge challenge in international law. When can you hold a state legally accountable for what a non-state armed group does, especially when proving direct command and control is so difficult, even if support is evident? The legal frameworks are still grappling with that.
So wrapping up this deep dive, it's clear the Second Congo War wasn't just another conflict. It was immensely complex, devastatingly destructive.
Absolutely. It was this toxic brew of politics, economics, especially resource greed, and deep-seated ethnic tensions. The sheer number of external players involved, each with their own agenda, just magnified the tragedy, the impact on the Congolese people and their environment. It's almost impossible to overstate that lure of mineral wealth was undeniably central to starting it and keeping it going for so long.
Well, hopefully for everyone listening, this deep dive has helped untangle some of that complexity. Hopefully you've got a clearer picture now of the background, the events, the key players, and the really profound, lasting impact of this crucial time in African history.
That was the goal, to provide a comprehensive but, manageable overview. We hope it shed light on the core dynamics of this incredibly significant conflict.
And it leaves us with some big questions, doesn't it? When you think about the DRC's unbelievable natural wealth, why has it been the source of so much conflict and suffering, not prosperity? What does that mean long-term for the region and even for the global economy, given how critical those minerals are? And maybe most importantly, what does this whole tragic story tell us about that difficult relationship between resources, war, and international responsibility?
Heavy questions, definitely worth pondering further.
Indeed. something for you all to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.